Hi, welcome to an edition of Education Matters. Today we'll be talking about communication tips for school districts. I think communication for school districts is really very important. Sometimes we overlook in some of the issues that we follow. With me, I have two guests who are communication specialists. I have Lori Perlow, who's the Public Information Officer for the Haddon Township School District. It's a consortium. Welcome, Lori. How are you?
Doing well. How are you, Ray?
I'm great. And also we have Paul Zeller, who's the Director of Technology and Communications with the Pascack Valley Regional High School District in Bergen County. Welcome, Paul.
Good morning, Ray. It's great to be here.
It's great to have both of you. First, Lori, like I said before, communications to me is vitally important for school districts, maybe more important now than ever before. But in the last 20 months or so, I think it's been much more difficult because there are a lot of things have been happening. We've been going through a crisis at the state and national level. And I've heard you talk about the four phases of a crisis, and I think it's important for us to know that as we go into this. So could you briefly go over what the four phases are?
Sure. So what you described is very true, Ray. Everybody is tired. Everybody is feeling very burnt out because this has been, quite a time for everyone in education. But I always find it important to remind my colleagues and my clients that the reason that we all feel so tired and so burnt out is that we have been in a perpetual cycle of crisis communications since the pandemic started. So when we refer to crisis communications and the cycle of it, there are four phases. So the first phase is readiness. That's everything that a district does to prepare for a crisis. So if we think of it in terms of the drills that we do every month, right? That is also readiness. So that's the first phase. Then when a crisis hits, no matter what type of a crisis it is, we have to respond. That's the second phase. Then as things are progressing through the crisis, we get to what's called the reassurance phase. That's phase 3. We're reassuring our stakeholders that the district is addressing the situation. These are the steps that are taken. That can be a relatively long stage. And then the fourth and final stage is recovery. And that's the time period where districts can actually start to rebuild trust after a crisis. So the reason that we all feel so burnt out and tired is because we've never really gotten to that fourth phase. We all thought that in spring of 2021, we were going to enter that phase, but it was short-lived and it didn't happen. We went right back. So for all of this time since March 2020, we've been toggling between the second and third phase. And it isn't until we get to that fourth and final recovery phase that we'll start to feel some relief. And I'm relatively optimistic. I think that we're going to get to that fourth phase sooner than later. I don't want to overpromise, but I do think that we're heading in the right direction.
Paul, I want to follow that up. One of the things, a lot of districts have communication plans for a crisis, but I know you believe that we should have a communication plan all the time. So why should a district have a communication plan?
Well, I think to Lori's point that there's a few factors involved. Like you mentioned, definitely a crisis communication plan, but it goes beyond that. So what have we established as far as a blueprint for how we're going to communicate with people day to day? How have we established that trust? The trust factor needs to be established before the crisis happens. So if we're not pushing out information to people ahead of time and they don't understand what's going on in the school on a day-to-day basis, when that crisis happens, and it will, when that crisis happens, what is the comfort level of the parents, of the students, of the community at large, of the police, of the mayor and council? All these factors come into play. And it's very important that if you have that communication plan in. So what does that embody? That embodies how are we getting information out? What information are we getting out? Who is getting that information out? All of these little nuances need to have a plan so it's not ad hoc. It's not, well, we only put something out if the football team wins the championship. Well, what if they don't win the championship this year? Does that mean nothing goes out in the fall? So having that constant flow of information going out is crucial. And that communication plan gives you the guideline. It gives you the steps to do that.
Tying those two things together, there's something called branding, and that's you both have touched on building trust with your community, and I think branding plays a little part in that. Lori, could you explain what branding is? Because I think a lot of people just think that's a private enterprise type thing, but it's becoming more and more important for school districts.
Absolutely, it really is. So more and more school districts are placing an emphasis on branding for a few different reasons. And each district kind of comes at it from a different approach. You know, some districts are faced with declining enrollment. And so for that reason, they want to build or rebuild or refresh their brand because they feel that it doesn't necessarily align with the educational experience that is delivered in their schools. So, and they have to compete, let's be honest. There's a lot of competition amongst schools, public, private, et cetera, online, so many choices these days. So public schools in particular are definitely starting to place more of an emphasis on their brand. But I have to say, branding isn't just about visuals, right? When we think of branding, we think of logos, you know, we think of packaging in the private sector. But when we're talking about branding in a school, we're talking about other things beyond the visual. So we're talking about, you know, what communication style is conveyed. We're talking about, you know, how does somebody feel when they first arrive at a school building? Is it well maintained? Is there good signage? There's so many different things, but at the end of the day, it's not just a logo. It's everything. It's every interaction that an employee has with one of their stakeholders. It's, you know, it could be something as simple as, you know, if a parent calls to the school, do they just get, you know, patched around to different extensions, or do they actually get a human being that's going to help them and answer their question and show care and concern? That's what parents look for in the brand of their child's school. So there's a lot of different factors that go beyond the visual. And at the end of the day, it's how people feel when they think about the school district.
Paul, going back, and this ties into the branding a little bit, but you talked about the communication plan. You have to have a social media presence. I know a lot of people get nervous about social media, and we all hear the horror stories, but you pretty much cannot avoid it because that's where a lot of people get their information from. So any tips on how districts should be using social media?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So tying it into branding, what are people seeing about your district? What are they saying about your district? And if you're not engaged in social media, you're missing a huge opportunity. I know years ago, most districts wanted to put their head in the sand and said, oh, that's something the kids do. Oh, that's something where the parents go to complain. And those things may be true, but there's a lot more to it. So if your kids are having a great day doing a pep rally, where are those pictures being seen? Are they being seen at all? Like, there's some great things going on at schools, and oftentimes we get so focused on the masks and the vaccination and all this other stuff that's not really what's truly going on in the school. It's not truly what's going on in the classroom, on the field. So those things need to be captured. And social media, think about it, if you read any article at all about communication, most people are getting their information from social media, right, wrong, or indifferent. That's a fact. So if we're not communicating that way, how are we communicating? Is it a letter from the superintendent noting about COVID contact tracing? Well, that's not fun. And is that the brand we want to get out there? No, we want to get out there the kids with a big smile on their face as they're throwing a frisbee on the football field at lunchtime. Like, those are the things we want to capture and get people to see that it's a good place to be. So social media is crucial to doing that.
Just a quick follow-up on that. I don't know if Lori, you want to comment. If you're not putting your message out there, someone else will put your message out there for you or define the school district. Is that kind of the point that both of you are making?
Lori, I'll defer to you.
Yeah, that is exactly the point. And I know when it comes to social media, a lot of districts are sometimes a little bashful in jumping in, and we understand why. There's certainly some risk involved. But at the end of the day, just because a district doesn't have a presence doesn't mean they're not going to then be talked about. They're still going to be talked about. It just means that they don't have to, they don't have a say necessarily, and they don't have a way to reach their audience. That's really what it comes down to, is you have to know how your stakeholders are receiving their information. As Paul mentioned earlier, most people will just naturally go to social media to find information and to find news. So if you're not there, you're only going to make it more complicated for them to find the information that they need. So it's not to say that social media is the only way to communicate. It's not, but it's one very important channel that every district should be using to, a certain extent. And again, I also understand there are a lot of times there are capacity issues in a district, and that's often why there isn't somebody who's dedicated to social media or dedicated to communication. So as long as you can divide and conquer and do something, something is always better than nothing at all.
All right, this is a question to both of you. I guess I'll go back to you, Lori. And I think Paul mentioned it before. I'm of the mindset it's not if a crisis is going to occur, it's when it's going to occur. Something's going to go wrong. Things don't, it's not Shangri-La in every school district, 365 days a year. So how do you communicate during a crisis, and how do you start to prepare for it, maybe with the press? Lori, you can go on this one.
Sure. Yeah, so you're right, Ray. It's not a matter of when or if, it's when. So it's always best to plan, and do more planning. Planning for every possible scenario, plan for different times of day. I had one client that had a crisis. It turned out to be nothing, but there was a threat that came in early in the morning. And when they had to lock the school down, it was during arrival time. That's about the most inconvenient time we could imagine, more so than lunch, because not everybody was even on site at the building. So they learned a lot through that experience. When you have a crisis, make sure that you debrief afterwards, because again, there is always something to learn from a situation. Talk to your neighboring districts. If you know that they've endured a crisis, talk to them, find out what happened, find out what they learned that you can then learn from and not have happened in your own district. One of the most important things, though, during a crisis is to make sure that you are pushing out facts in a timely manner. But they must be confirmed facts. We never, ever want to share too much information too soon, particularly if the situation involves the police. In that case, it becomes their matter, and there's very limited bits of information that a school district can share. So it's always important to know where those boundaries lie. And then again, when it comes to messaging during a crisis, if something is unraveling, what does every parent want to know? The children are safe. But you can't say the children are safe unless you know for a fact that they are. So, you have to just be so very careful. It's a bit of an art. And at the end of the day, we know that from time to time during a crisis, we're going to, make a mistake, or, perhaps the timing isn't quite right. In this era of, instant information, sometimes districts need to pause and slow down before they can push information out. But at the end of the day, if you make a mistake and when you look back and you realize that, you could have done things better or differently, it's always best to own it and move on.
Well, that's
And if
pretty.
I could just
You have
tack-
anything, Paul? Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, if I could just tack on to that, the one thing too, as part of crisis communication planning, is how do we deal with the media? So, okay, there's a gas leak in town, in the school, and it's dealt with quickly. The media is not going to jump on it. But what if it's something more serious? How are we prepared to deal with that? And it's important in crisis communication planning to get that down and understand exactly what's going to happen, who's allowed to speak, what messages are we going to get out there? Because the reality of it is, if a person's perception is their reality. And what is their perception? Their perception is whatever information they're given. And if they're not given information, they're going to find information. And where are they getting that information? So the narrative's got to be controlled at the social media level, at the communication directly to parents, and at the media level.
Yeah, my point to a lot of board members is information travels fast, misinformation travels even faster. Uh, Paul, just one of the things, and Lori, you can follow up. What are some of the mistakes that sometimes districts make inadvertently as they in their communication efforts?
I think Lori touched on a lot of them. I think one of the big ones is saying things that may not be 100% true, or we may not be 100% sure of. I've heard of districts, I've read the articles and the stories about them saying the children are safe, and then it turned out not all of the children were safe. Most of the children were safe. If you're going to put a statement out there that the children are safe, you got to be sure. I know in our district recently, we had a gas leak. There was nothing in the end, no major issue. Everybody ended up being safe. But when I got that message of put an email out telling everybody that the children are safe, I double questioned it. I said, before this goes out, are we sure the children are safe? If it's going to be a large crisis, a large concern, consider having the media meet you at an offsite location. Maybe your central office is not at the school, or have them set up at a field or someplace away from the kids and away from the crisis. So this way, the kids are calm, the emergency personnel can do what they need to do, and then the communicator, whether it's the superintendent or someone he or she designates, can then deal with the media. So those are some things, because if you don't do that, the news vans are all going to line up right in front of the school. And that's another pitfall people fall into. And now you've got cameras taking pictures of everything that you don't necessarily need them to see.
Lori, any follow up on that or?
Sure. So a few things that I would add, one big misstep is not communicating at all. And there are times when there are, small incidents that occur, but they spread, because what happens is during this course of a school day, students will text their parents, right? Something minor that, the district doesn't feel needs to be communicated widely. But kids call or text their parents from the school building secretly, and suddenly it becomes a big issue, and then the school has to react. And we don't, again, fine line, but always better to err on the side of over communicating rather than under communicating. And that can sometimes squash a rumor mill, which is helpful. The flip side to that is too much information. We often will over communicate, especially when it comes to things like curriculum. Unless a parent is in the field of education, a lot of times this content goes right over a parent's head. So we want to make sure that we don't use edu-speak, and that we communicate with parents in a way that they will understand and not overcomplicate a message. And then, the other thing, as we've touched a lot on crisis communications, a lot of times we can get ahead of these critical situations by having open forums and delivering information to a community in advance of a public board meeting. And this I have seen utilized in a few of the districts that I work with, and it seems to work really well because you have an open two-way dialogue with information shared in advance of a public board meeting, and I'm talking about things like new initiatives and things like that. Not sensitive information, just general district information. And I think communities feel much more invested when they've heard about it before a public meeting or a public board meeting, but just in a regular open forum. It feels like they're more part of the process. And I think there's a lot of appreciation for that strategy.
Great tips. One other resource that districts may have is NJSPA. I love, education, we love acronyms. And I know you're President, Lori, and Paul, you are President-elect. Why don't you tell us what that is and how it can maybe help a district, even if they don't have a communications person? And tell us what the acronym stands for, too.
Lori, I defer to you.
Okay. Chain of command. So NJSPA is the New Jersey School Public Relations Association, and we're the state chapter of the National School Public Relations Association. We have a thriving chapter of 70+ members, not just professional school communicators. We have a very diverse mix. We also have many superintendents who have joined us. And you know, the core of our chapter's mission is to provide professional development to those who are responsible for school communications in the state of New Jersey. That's really the core of what we do. But I would almost say that what's most valuable to our members is the relationships that they form with other members and the support that they receive from their members. There's nothing more stressful than, you know, enduring a crisis and, you know, having it be a crisis you've not experienced or been trained for, and this happens, but knowing who to call to, who's been through it before and can hold your hand and give you advice and support, that's just invaluable. And we've all been there. I've been there, Paul's been there. It's truly the most valuable piece to this, to being a member of the New Jersey School Public Relations Association.
Paul?
Yeah, I mean, to echo what Lori said, the connections are critical. I know myself, I've used countless times, I've used help from other people when I'm dealing with things. And it doesn't have to even be a crisis. It could just simply be, hey, I'm working on this new project. I've never done this before. Anybody have any resources? And lo and behold, you know, right now we're in an interim superintendent stage, and we're gonna have a new superintendent, you know, in the upcoming months. And I've never gone through that before. 4 members. I didn't even have to reach out. Hey, I hear you're getting a new superintendent. Here are resources we've used to help introduce the new superintendent into the community. And boom, the information's right there. So that connection piece can't be undersold. I'm a huge cheerleader of the association. The programming is a big deal. We try to get timely topics. Right now, we're kind of in this virtual mode, but we're looking to get back to physical sessions soon. But between the professional development and those connections, I cannot say enough. It's a nominal fee to join, and it's totally worth it.
Okay, it brings us to the end. I would just echo, communications is important, and someone's taking a lead in your district, and maybe they should look into the association. That brings us to the end of this Education Matters. I hope you found these communication tips very helpful. And if you want to do a follow-up, you can go look them up, and I'm sure they'll be willing to help you. So thank you, Paul. Thank you, Lori.